talk. And the next session we are going to be have is on evidence-based medicine. So as we know that there are different levels of evidence are available already, and which is going to be more suitable for us to take any decision. So that's what we are going to be discuss now. And for this, I welcome the other speaker, Dr. Deepika Bansal, and she is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of Pharmacy Practice, Naipur Mohali, and she completed her MD and DM in clinical pharmacology, once again from the Premier Institute, PGIMR, Chandigarh. And her areas of research on clinical trials, data mining and pharmacovigilance, health economics and outcomes research, and evidence-based medicine. And all these things are mainly to develop a cost-effective approaches for prevention and management of chronic diseases. And this is the area of research of Dr. Deepika Bansal. And apart from this, she's very good at conducting systematic reviews and meta-analysis and coming out with a best level of evidence. And on her name already there are many systematic reviews starting from 2012 when she joined in Naipur Mohali, and there are a good number of articles which are already cited very well in terms of evidence-based medicine. So I'm sure the knowledge and expertise the ma'am is having is going to be certainly useful for the participants for today's session on different levels of evidence-based medicine. So with this, ma'am, I request you to share your presentation and deliver your talk.
Okay, thank you, Krishna. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Before proceeding on to my scientific session, I want to thank Professor Murthy and of course Dr. Krishna for sending me this invite and providing this opportunity to share my knowledge with all the participants. As already we have gone through Dr. Singh's lecture and you have already been made aware about systematic reviews, so not taking much of the time, and I'll be talking a small step, as Madam Vasu has already told you, that be good in at least one step of systematic review. We shall be learning something about levels of evidence and their role in evidence-based medicine. So first of all, as I hope the students are most of the participants are students. So what is evidence? Evidence is any piece of research work that has been done. So it's not only the RCTs which are considered evidence, but even the in vitro studies or any single case report is considered as evidence. So the next question that we have is, what is evidence-based medicine? It is nothing but finding the best clinical literature to answer your clinical query so that you can make evidence-based decisions for your patients or at a larger group, society, country. Do you think it is that simple? No, it includes many more perspectives. So let us try to see what is the scientific basis and the explanation of evidence-based medicine. So this is the definition that has been provided. It is...
Ma'am, can we have your screen, ma'am, so that I can share?
Yes.
Can you please share your screen, ma'am, so I can access that?
I have shared my screen. I have shared my desktop also. Can't you see?
No, ma'am.
No, we can't see your screen.
Okay, just a second. Let me see.
Yeah, please, ma'am. Please share the screen, ma'am, so that I can. Yeah, I can. I'm getting it now.
You're getting it, no?
Yes, I'm getting it now.
Okay, I had shared actually. Wait a second. I'll just put it on this. Okay, now is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, I did it long back actually. Okay, it's okay. So is it okay now?
Yes, ma'am, it is fine. You can please go ahead, ma'am.
Fine. So this is the definition that was provided. Actually, EBM is not a very recent concept. It came around 1991 by Guyot and Sackett et al. This term was initially coined, and over past 3 decades, starting from 1991, this concept has actually evolved from EBM to EBP, that is evidence-based practice. So if you see the definition and see the red fonts, it not only involves the best research evidence in the form of research studies, but it also incorporates the training, skills and experience of health professionals, or what we call as clinical expertise, but also including the patient values, patient cultures in which the patient is residing and he has got attached. Do you think there is anything we need to include in EBM apart from these three main factors? Yes, nowadays they say you need to include one more thing, that is called circumstantial evidence. That is the social support system, the affordability, the accessibility, the economic implications, because as you know, in many of the developing and underdeveloped countries, just the economic constraints are the main constraints or the bottleneck to provide the best form of medical care. So apart from the three factors that you see, we need to include the circumstantial evidence also. But why do you think we need EBM? Why was not clinical expertise earlier available is sufficient? Why? Because we have lot of medical literature. You just go to the PubMed, you will type one mesh word and you will see millions of research papers that is coming. But do you think all the papers are of immediate use to you? No. It is only a small piece, a small quantity of research literature that is available. It is of immediate use to you. So now the next component or the primary component of the present lecture, that is what is levels of evidence. We also call it as a hierarchy of evidence, as you just heard in earlier lecture. Levels of evidence, it refers to actually what degree available information is trustworthy or you can trust for. So it is basically you are trying to develop a system of rating various levels of evidence, various levels of research studies that is available to you. Again, this is not a new term that has come into the picture. The earliest evidence that we get about levels of evidence is way back in 1979 in Canada, when the Canadian health system was trying to develop the recommendations for the diseases and the drugs to be included in periodic health examination. And they wanted these recommendations to be based on the best medical literature or evidence that was available at that time. So this is the thing that I told you. Anyway, why do you think it is needed? For that, we need to answer a very simple question. Do you think that all the evidence that is available at present is generated equally? Certainly the answer is no. Traditionally speaking, some of the study methods are assigned a higher value or are considered better, useful than the other methods. What are these methods which are considered more reliable or less reliable? Let us see. This is the crux of the whole lecture, and we need to see a lot of components in this. I hope my cursor is visible. Okay, so this colored structure is known as wedge of evidence, or it is also called as the slide says, evidence-based pyramid. The literature describes a different array of studies. If you see from the base, as you go up, you can see a lot of studies. Right from the in vitro studies, background information, experiences, expert opinions, going to some individual case reports, series of case reports which is known as case series, going to the prospectively conducted studies, cohort studies, going to randomized, non-randomized studies, and of course, the golden standard for evaluating any intervention, its effectiveness as well as safety, which is called as a randomized controlled clinical trial. Now, as you can see, the 3 points described here, observational studies, experimental studies, and of course the critical studies. The first 2 points, observational studies, where you just observe the patients and you write your opinion according to that. This is the least reliable or the evidence which comes as safe. And then comes your golden standard randomized studies, and finally these 2 observational along with the experimental study. These are called primary literature or primary data. And when you try to pull these available primary data, then you come on to the secondary literature, which is known as critical appraisal, and here comes your meta-analysis or systematic. Now we need to understand these two arrows. The first arrow, how do this hierarchy of literature studies is being plotted? This is based on something which is known as the term bias. Bias or the methodological rigor with which this study is being conducted and the probability of the bias. So we understand that by employing three important principles, that is randomization, masking, and of course the introduction of the control group, we assign the randomized controlled study as the best level of evidence as far as the primary data or the primary literature is concerned. Because we know that expert opinions or the observational studies can be biased, can have some background confounding factors which can lead to deviated results. So from this pyramid, what do we understand? The two important things that leads to the higher level of evidence, that is one, randomization, another, the effect of control. It includes the standardized condition under which the experiment is being performed along with the introduction of the control. And finally, we come on to the right side of the arrow, which says that as you go up, the level of evidence improves. So if you see the various rating scales of level of evidence that has been described in literature for answering various questions, the level of evidence, some say it is from 1 to 5, some say it is from 1 to 3. So 1 is considered as the best level of evidence and 3 or 5 is considered as the least level of evidence. But here I want to make one small point to all the participants that it is not necessary that you always have RCTs to answer a particular query. So whatever evidence that is available to you is still considered a piece of evidence. So many of the queries like diagnostic tests, or we'll see in the coming up slides, we do not have RCTs. So here it doesn't mean that the real world evidence does not carry importance. In fact, nowadays with the introduction of digital systems, you have a lot of Fitbits, you have smartwatches which can actually analyze your heart rate, your exercise pyramids, your walking distance, etc. These also actually incorporate, these also provide a lot of data which is useful in managing the patients, which is useful in creating a lot of guidelines. So we have seen what was the top of that pyramid, that was the systematic review. Anyway, this slide has been already explained to you by Dr. Singh in the great detail. I won't go into the details of how to conduct the systematic reviews, as this has already been explained, and moreover in the afternoon sessions you will be given a comprehensive practical approach, step-by-step conduct of the systematic review. But I just want to make you aware about one small step, that systematic review is just not a review. It is like an original study where you need to have a construction of a very discrete, defined, scientifically relevant question. You adopt discrete methods, not only to search the studies which act as individual patients, like in the randomized controlled trials, you have patients as individual subjects, while in the systematic review, you have studies as the individual subjects. So the selection of these studies, the incorporation and the exclusion of various studies, the using of various statistical methods to pool these studies, to present the data and definitely to interpret the data requires the background training, skills, and of course your expertise in the particular clinical subjects. So it's not that you have understood how to create a forest plot and you can perform the meta-analysis any subject. No, it is not like that. You need to have a lot of background knowledge about a particular disease, and then you develop your foreground knowledge by using the individual studies to pool and creating the report of systematic review. Okay, so we have understood that the level of evidence starts right from in vitro studies and going up to the randomized controlled trials. Systematic review of randomized controlled trials is considered as the best level of evidence. But then it arises another question. Do you ever need to modify level of evidence? As I already mentioned, that the answer is yes. You do not have RCTs to answer all your questions. So what are the considerations for modifying any level of evidence? There are two important considerations that you need to understand. One is the type of question and another is the quality assessment of the studies, including both the primary and the secondary. What are the questions that are available with us? Therapy, everybody is aware of. There are two forms of interventions with us, intervention A and intervention B, to treat a particular disease. Which intervention works better or best in the patients with a particular condition? So this is a therapy question. Apart from that, we have a whole armamentarium of questions with us in the clinical sciences. For example, etiology, causes, like we just saw Streptococcus pneumoniae, the bacterial cause for the pneumonia. Harm, side effects of the drugs, which you know is a very important concept nowadays developing, that is pharmacovigilance. Then the third important thing is the contributing factors. There are a lot of chronic lifestyle disorders like heart diseases, diabetes, etc., where you may not be able to pinpoint a particular cause. Prognosis. What is going to happen if we do nothing? For example, the long-term prognosis of patients with cancer. Diagnosis, how a diagnostic test is going to perform. What is the probability of having the disease if the test comes out to be positive? Sorry for the repetition, harm and etiology. Next, prevention. For example, immunization, some social support system, some kind of sanitation measure which can lead to the prevention of the diseases. Quality improvement, health professionals' views, societal views, etc. Economic decisions. As you know, nowadays with the health technology assessment development and lot of interventions coming up to treat one particular condition, which interventions are going to be cost effective for a particular society. Here we do a lot of Markov modeling and we may not have only the RCTs to provide you the best answer. And finally, we have burden of illness, where you won't do any RCT to understand the prevalence of a particular condition, while you will try to see the observational studies like case control or cohort study or simple one-arm prevalence studies to understand the burden of illness. Now, what is being given in the red? I'll just show you two examples that how do we perform meta-analysis or the systematic. First question that comes is about the therapy question. This is the recent study that was being conducted by my students and we just happened to get the approval. This is about the efficacy and safety of insulin analogs. Now, to give you the background, you understand that diabetic ketoacidosis is a acute emergency condition which many patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus can suffer. It is certainly a life-threatening illness, and if it is not treated immediately, it can lead to death. So now we were giving regular insulin as the primary form of therapy. But recently, we have seen a lot of insulin analogs coming into the market like Lispro, Glargine, Glulicine, Aspart, etc. These newer forms of insulin analogs were considered by the sponsors, that is the pharmaceutical innovators, that these are more effective, these are more safe. But we all knew that the data available with the recently introduced insulin analogs is very less, and certainly they are much more expensive. So to answer this query, we tried to perform the indirect treatment comparison using a Bayesian approach, ITC. This is considered as a higher form of meta-analysis. This is also called as a network meta-analysis, where you do not compare the intervention with the placebo, but you do perform a head-to-head comparison of various active interventions. Now, again, the primary thing in the methodology is you cannot rely on one single library. As Madam Meenu Singh has already told you, that you have a lot of databases which are nowadays considered as library. So here, if you see, we have used or we have searched about the relevant RCTs in PubMed, Embase, Scopus, Cochrane, clinicaltrials.gov. So almost 5 different databases were thoroughly searched to find the relevant randomized clinical trial. So what were the findings that we obtained? So we found 10 randomized controlled trials, including 435 patients with diabetic ketoacidosis. And what were the interventions? 5 different types of insulin analogs were compared. And finally, what did we evaluate or what did we pool the data? We pooled the data regarding the safety and efficacy of these 5 regular insulins. So what is the implication of our review? The implication is that the newer insulin analogs were found to be equally effective and safe as regular insulin. I'm not going into the numbers, understanding that the participants are newer to this subject. So these are the implications, because we found almost similar efficacy and safety with respect to the regular insulin versus the newer insulin analog. So what is the way forward from this systematic review? The way forward is we need to perform a cost-effective analysis. It is a type of a pharmacoeconomic analysis which will provide us the economic implications of using the newer analogs versus the regular analogs. Okay, so the next question is about the contributing factor. Why I have picked up these 2 questions is you will see that though we call again that randomized controlled trials is the best form of evidence, I just wanted to make you aware that it is not only the RCTs, but few questions we need to actually put the available evidence in the form of observational studies. So giving you again the background, you understand that low back pain is considered a highly prevalent and a condition with a high level of disability. In fact, what I could see from the literature, there is a disease prevalence atlas issued by WHO every 2 years. We see that it is the 6th main cause of disability adjusted life years. So we were trying to evaluate the contributing factors for low back pain, and we found that hypovitaminosis D, or the deficiency of vitamin D, is very much prevalent in the originally conducted observational study at our own center. So we saw that did we see all these things in the literature, or do we have similar kind of evidence in the literature? So while going to the background of this disease, we understand that lot of societies, this kind of prevalence studies has been performed globally. So we try to pool these evidence in the form of hypovitaminosis D prevalence. So what was the design? It was a meta-analysis. But what did we pool? We pooled the observational studies, including cohort, which are prospectively cross-sectional, which is available at one point of time, and case control studies, which are usually the retrospective studies, to evaluate the pooled prevalence of hypovitaminosis. So what were the results that we found? The results were that the pooled prevalence we found was 72%. It is written as 0.72. So the pooled result was 72%. And how many studies did we find? We found 14 studies. And what is the number of patients? 260. Here you need to just understand one more thing, which I will explain you in the later part of the slides. Heterogeneity and inconsistency of measurements were identified. I'll explain you what is the meaning. And the results say that marked heterogeneity was present among the studies. So we have understood that the type of the questions actually decides what kind of primary data will be available to pool and provide you the best level of evidence. The second question that decides your best level of evidence is the quality of the evidence. In clinical research, there is a one dictum which is very much prevalent, that the evidence is not created equally, and you need to critically appraise or see with great question marks or read or interpret great question marks all the available studies. Now here the important point is that you need to appraise not only the secondary literature but also the primary evidence, the primary studies that is available, right from your case report, case series to any performed reported randomized double-blind placebo control or active controlled clinical trial. So do you think that anything is available with us to guide us through this critical appraisal? Certainly yes, and you will be shown again how to use these tools in the afternoon sessions. I'll just give you some points about it. The two tools that are available with us are: one, guidelines for the authors to prepare various kinds of reports, and second is the tools to assess the risk of bias. So what are the guidelines that is available to us? You always would have heard this dictum from your teacher: what is not documented is not done. What is the meaning? The meaning is that even if you have used randomization in your clinical trial, but if you have not documented it in your report, the methods, the application, and the results of the randomization, it means that you have not documented. If you have not used the principle of randomization in your original study. So apart from the number of guidelines that are available with us to report different kinds of studies, I have just shown the two icons. One is the CONSORT. This is the consolidated standards for reporting the clinical trials. And second is the PRISMA, that is relevant to you, which is for reporting the systematic reviews. Now here, what is these guidelines actually help you? These guidelines actually shows the flow of information through each phase of the study. So if you talk about the clinical trial, it will tell you that how many patients were screened. Finally, how many patients were included, how many patients were excluded, what were the reasons for the exclusion of patients, and how many patients finally were analyzed in each group. For example, if it is a two-arm study, one is your active intervention, another is your placebo arm, that how many patients are finally being analyzed in the active intervention arm versus the placebo arm. And if we talk about the PRISMA guidelines, what does it tell? It again tells you that how many studies did you find relevant with using just the title in different databases. How many studies did you find it relevant after reading the abstract? How many duplicate studies were found in each database? And finally, how many studies with specific study characteristics using your PCOS design, as you have heard earlier also, are being used in your meta-analysis and tooled to interpret to give your findings. So this is various guidelines that are there to report various types of study designs. You have CONSORT, PRISMA, STROBE for observational studies, MOOS for meta-analysis, START and CORRECT. And I must confess that apart from CORRECT, I have used all the guidelines, and they actually help you to report various studies. The second question or the second tool that is available with us to critically appraise the various forms of studies is risk of bias assessment tools. Now here you are all familiar the Cochrane colloquium, which is the golden standard for any person, any individual who's interested in performing EBM, and they provide you a lot of ready-made reviews. And so they give you 3 important tools which are available online free of cost. So all of you are advised also to go through these tools. One is the Robbie's tools to assess the risk of bias in systematic reviews, which are already performed and available in the clinical literature. Robbins tool, which is the risk of bias in non-randomized studies of interventions, and the ROB 2.0 tool, which is considered as a revised tool for the risk of bias in randomized trials. Now you see that these are not talking about observational studies, these are not talking about diagnostic studies. Why? Because majority of the times Cochrane is involved in evaluating the effectiveness and safety of various interventions, and they are least interested in prevalence of various illnesses or economic studies, etc. So have I used these tools? Yes, I have used all the 3 tools, and this is again how the ROB tool gives you the results, and this is from again my own study. So you see here you can see 3 important colors, that is red, green and yellow. Yellow is where no availability of the particular characteristic is available, and if you see the green is the best thing, that it gives you that a particular characteristic of a study, methodological characteristic of the study is being reported well. So you see that the bias is being calculated in an RCT using again randomization, which includes allocation concealment. Second, the principle of blinding, which tells you about the outcomes assessment blinding, as well as the attrition rate blinding, that I told you that how many patients were excluded at each step of the study and what were the reasons for this exclusion. And of course, the bias in the reporting, that is the selective reporting, which you decrease it by using a control. And this is how finally we get to understand the division of the studies that have been included in the systematic review, and we divide these studies into 3 important probability of bias categories, that is low risk, which tells you the green, unclear risk and high risk. Now here I need to mention that do we have these tools only? We do not have other tools? No, we have a whole lot of tools to assess various types of studies. Like one very important tool I tell you is the Newcastle-Ottawa scale, which is used to assess the risk of bias in observational studies. Joanna Briggs critical appraisal tool, which is again used to give you the risk of bias assessment in observational studies. Another coming up tool is the Pedro scale, which is very important in assessing a lot of active comparator clinical trials, which we also used in some of the recently performed systematic reviews. This is just to give you an introduction about these tools, and certainly you will be taught later on how to use these tools. So we have understood that level of evidence, how the level of evidence gets improved from the base to the top, and do we have these systematic reviews already available? And these are certainly called as foraging tools, and certainly as Meenu Singh madam has told, we have lot of databases which gives you actually the ready-made systematic reviews to answer your questions. And you can see all these tools. We all are aware about these 2 tools, that is Medline, PubMed. PubMed is the larger one and the Medline is the freely accessible one. Embase, which is paid. So certainly you can all use PubMed. Cochrane, which is available in Indian setting free of cost. JBI Connector is another database. Ovid is another database. But among these, all these databases are important to different types of stakeholders. Like I understand UpToDate is one such database which provides a lot of systematic reviews which are of immediate use to the clinicians to take decisions about their individual patients having maybe one disease or maybe the presence of comorbid conditions. So we see that the systematic reviews and the meta-analysis comes, and this is a pyramid about the secondary literature, and we see evidence-based summaries, guidelines, national and international comes on the top of this. Okay, so this is the slide showing about the Cochrane and few of the things that Cochrane library does. And all the participants, I would advise, please open this website, scroll this website to understand, to have an insight how the various steps, what are the various stakeholders in performing and interpreting systematic reviews. Not taking much of the time. So this is the handbook which is available in the PDF format, freely available. All of you can download, can read, and this also gives you the online tools which you can see the links from this PDF also, the website also, to understand the various steps that are being incorporated, used to perform any systematic review. Thank you very much, and you can contact me for any further query as my email ID is being given.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the elaborated presentation on different levels of evidence.
I hope I have not taken much of the time.
No, ma'am, we have sufficient time.
Okay.
I'm sure the participants already got some idea about the different levels of evidence and how we are going to use them for any decision making. Ma'am, here we have a few questions, so we can quickly answer those questions from the participants.
Okay.
And the first question is how to differentiate between evidence-based and evidence-informed decision making. So is there any difference between evidence-based medicine and evidence-informed decision making?
Okay, see, try to understand when we try to perform a systematic review, which is usually going to be incorporated in the EBM, we take studies. Studies means there is a very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. These do not describe a particular patient which may have a lot of comorbid conditions along with, as I told you, some of the patient constraints also. So when we say evidence-informed decision making, that depends upon the context you are working. You're working for the individual patient, you're working for the one particular community, society, national level, international level. So it is like evidence-informed decision making becomes a very relevant to a particular stakeholder. While EBN is a standard format in which we use a particular methodology to interpret or report our results.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there's one more question. How to find a best available evidence from the literature? So as we know, there are different levels of evidence. So how to find the best evidence from the literature?
For that, I would say that please try to understand that first try to start understanding what are the types of clinical queries we can have. As I gave you try to give you a simpler classification of types of questions. Right. So certainly if you are thinking about a burden of disease study, let's say you are doing a thesis for doing any kind of a drug utilization study or any kind of a particular burden of illness study in your area. Let's say you are working in a big city. So certainly you would like to see that are these kind of studies available in the literature? And you need to understand that your question is not about effectiveness, it is about the prevalence of the illness. So you are going to find some kind of an observational studies. Observational studies, where can you find? First, search in PubMed. What are the types of studies? Right from the individual studies. Second step, pooling the studies. Do you have individual studies? Okay, you found some individual studies. Second step, do you have any systematic review which has already pooled these kind of individual studies? Try to find that. For that, I would suggest, please first, very basic, please read the PubMed tutorial to perform extensive literature search. And I saw in your brochure also, I think you have one presentation telling all the participants about extensive literature search.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
in the
so that
they have it.
Yes, yeah, I just saw in the brochure, so that's why I did not elaborate on that. And that's one very basic step to make you aware that what are the different kinds of evidence available in the literature. Anyhow, various databases are paid, but PubMed is certainly free and everybody can access that.
Sure,
and PubMed tutorial is certainly an online tutorial, very easily available to all the participants. They can go through that advanced search material apart from using that basic mesh words.
Thank you, ma'am. I think one more last question from the participants. Do we need to take any ethics committee permission or clearance to do any systematic review and meta-analysis?
No. But nowadays there is one society which asks you to register whenever you are trying to conceptualize the systematic review. So we have seen the guidelines to report the systematic review, but as soon as you conceptualize that, okay, you want to perform the systematic review, you need to register in that forum, so that it actually helps you not to duplicate the studies, and it also helps you in further publication of your systematic review. Because I tell you, one of the students that happened few years back, he was performing one meta-analysis and systematic review, and by the time he wanted to publish it, it was already a similar kind of a topic was already published, and no journal was ready to publish his systematic review. So the kind advice to everyone is that, okay, ethics approval might not be required, but try to, I'm not telling you the name, try to find that, improve your surfing skills, find the society and register your systematic review.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. One last question, maybe from my side. I'm sure it's going to be useful for the participants also. As we have seen, there are different levels of evidence, starting from down to top. Down, we are going to have the case reports, case cross-sectional studies, and top, we are going to have systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And nowadays, we are seeing the systematic reviews by taking different kinds of articles as well. For example, doing the systematic review by taking RCTs, doing systematic reviews by taking observation studies, and even systematic reviews by taking the case reports and case series as well. So as we generally say, all the systematic reviews are on top. So can we consider whatever may be the articles they're taking, still we can consider all the systematic reviews on top as a highest level of evidence?
We might consider this as the highest level of evidence, but let me tell you another very important query, interesting query that is coming up nowadays is the two important concepts. One, the concept of RWE, real world evidence. As people are more and more apprehensive about the decisions of studies where 95% of the real patients do not fit into. So now the concept that is coming up is the real world evidence. You are being paid for giving your data. That is what they say. And the second thing is the individual case pooled data, which is again a systematic review only, but we are not pooling the studies. We are pooling individual patient level of data. So these two things are coming up to give you the better insights into the actual effectiveness of interventions, etc.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your time and the very good explanation about evidence-based medicine and other concepts, ma'am. I'm sure no participants got benefited out of it. And thank you so much once again for your acceptance and for our workshop, ma'am. It's our pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Krishna, for the invite, and certainly I hope all the participants will be making a lot of use from this workshop. And I really congratulate you and tell you all the best.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.